well. Hope you have rested well. And we are here for our 2 days sessions of interdisciplinary conversation. And it is in the context of Oxford Handbook of Christianity in Asia. And yesterday we had a wonderful function. And now in that context, now we take up the themes that are there in the book, but think further along each of the 5 themes. Now we have the lighting of the lamp, the lighting of the Kuthuvilakku. I invite the following 5 persons: Father Felix Wilfred, Professor Paul Appasamy, Professor Gudrun Lohner, Professor Mariko, and Professor George Evers. This little lamp with its manifold 5 flames is a profound symbol of mindfulness and our relatedness. Now this panel is numbered as panel 2. Panel 2, it's called panel 2, not panel 1, because it deals with the second section of the book, which is about cross-cultural flow of Asian Christianity. Since it deals with that second section, this panel also is identified as panel 2. And the question that is going to be taken up would be, what is distinctive about the plurality of Asian Christianity? And we have Professor Paul Joshua Bhakyaraj as the moderator, and Professor Michael Amaladas, Professor Atola Longkumar, Professor Paul Kuang, and Professor Sebastian Kim as panelists. I welcome the moderator as well as the panelists to the podium now.
And welcome to this first session, but in keeping with the theme of the flows, it's this panel 2 rather than panel 1. Panel 1 has flowed to tomorrow and panel 2 has come here today. So I hope it helps us to facilitate this discussion. Mentioned yesterday, but also something that many of us are aware, isn't it quite ironic that every time we speak about Asian Christianity, we have to emphasize that Christianity is Asian? And that is particularly true in some places more than others. We have to emphasize the origins lie in Asia, its character is quite Asian in many parts, and so on and so forth. I hope this discussion amongst this esteemed panel will help us unpack some of those cross-cultural flows and the plurality of Christianity in Asia. To begin with, I'll hand the floor over to Professor Michael Amaladas for his time.
Good morning to all of you. So the theme proposed to us for reflection is, as you just now heard, what is distinctive about the plurality of Christianity in Asia, cross-cultural flows of Asian Christianity. So keeping this title in mind, obviously this title seems to indicate the birth and the growth of Christianity in Asia precisely in a cross-cultural context. The cultures being precisely which encounter is that of the missionaries and that of the locals. It is true that Christianity was born in Asia, but it came back to Asia through Europe, at least to this part of Asia, South Asia and East Asia, came back to us through Europe, the European missionaries and so on. Though, because we have the exception of the Sirumalabar Malankara rites here in India, which may have had a direct influence from Asia itself. Cross-cultural dynamics may not necessarily work everywhere, because Christianity in Korea, for instance, came through a Korean who had gone to China and brought back Christianity. It was not brought by foreigners. The foreigners came later. They do contribute to the growth. The same way in Japan, though Christianity started with the missionaries, and yet there was a long period where the Christian community was alive and by themselves, left alone without any missionaries, and therefore there was certainly a dynamics would have been very different. If you look at the whole world, for instance, to realize what is special about Asia is precisely to compare that with Latin America. Now, Latin America is a big continent, and you have many countries, cultures, ethnic groups, etc. But the Christianity there is, you can say, it's all Hispanic. The Hispanic Christianity has managed to impose itself on the indigenous peoples there and transport it from Spain, and it still largely remains Hispanic even today. But that is not true of Asia. Even the Portuguese colonies here have not really imposed themselves, except maybe in pockets like Goa or Macau, maybe, but you don't really see the presence of the Goan Christianity. And even a Christianity like in Philippines, for instance, though it comes from the other side, the Hispanic influence from Mexico coming to Philippines, and it have been much more indigenized. And after the impact of the other missionaries who have gone to the Philippines. In Asia, of course, thanks to obviously Matteo Ricci and Roberto De Nobili, somehow culture conditions not only the socio-cultural life but also the socio-cultural expressions of Christian life. The liturgical sphere, when you go into the church, liturgy that remains even today largely Latin as a structure, if you take the Catholic Church. But much of the other life of the people here in Asia, thanks precisely to Ricci and De Nobili, who said that you can become a Christian but remain an Asian. Of course, socio-culturally, and now of course we are speaking of local theologies and so on, but we have largely remained Latins at the level of religion, worship, etc. But local, whatever culture we belong to, at the other levels of our ordinary life, etc. So already there we have a certain plurality of cultures, because practically the culture in every part of the world takes over the way it is organized. Even at the level of worship, side by side with the official liturgies that maybe have a Western orientation, you also have popular devotions, popular liturgies that are thoroughly localized. If you go to a sacramental, say a marriage celebration or any other celebration of, let us say, the rites of passage, you will find that the culture is very strongly present. There may be a little element of the Western thing coming in. So that way, at the level of popular religiosity as well as the way of life, we have remained very much Asian. And when in India, for instance, in the south of India, we have had a controversy about the famous Malabar rites, where precisely this kind of an adjustment to the local culture has been opposed by some missionaries, and they had to go up to Rome took decades with the kind of a communication of that period. But eventually, let us say, Rome justified this. They said we have to faithful, but it always gave a proviso. But take into consideration the situation in which you are, you manage, kind of a thing. So that gave leeway for the missionaries to do what they thought was. But even that Malabar rites, they did not really so much focus on the socio-cultural way of life of the people. For instance, when there were missionaries in Pondicherry, for instance, the problem with them was that they did not use in baptism the rite of touching the person with the saliva. He said this would not work in Asia, it would not work in Tamil Nadu. And this was of course reported, saying that the missionaries are not being faithful to the Latin ritual, So they did not object to the way of life, but object to the liturgical observances in which some modifications had to be done. And even this had to be decided by Rome eventually. And Rome, as I say, did not finally insist. They said, you look after the local situation and you go ahead. So the missionaries were, in that sense, were lucky, etc. Then, of course, ultimately, the plurality here comes in because of the pluralism of cultures and languages also. And also the way of life. For instance, if you take India, the Christianity is very much characterized by the caste system. Because nobody said that you can remain Indian though you become a Christian, but being Indian in India today, even today, is belong to one caste. There are no casteless people unless you are a foreigner or an Anglo-Indian or something. So therefore, it has become part of the way of life here, and that determines the way you express yourself, celebrate life in families, and so on and so forth. So this kind of a thing you find all over, in India or Asia, wherever you go, you find the local cultural, social situation reflected in what people do. Then we also have in India, the other difference also is that Christianity here is not merely Catholic Christianity or Roman Christianity. It has come from all churches. So you have missionaries from all the different churches. and therefore we have the Roman Catholic Church, we have practically every other church represented in India. And not to speak today of also of indigenous churches that are coming up, especially Pentecostal churches. You get a pastor, he puts a big church and he makes up a church, around the church, around the church building, etc. So therefore we have a wide variety of, even in the Catholics we have got 3 ritual families, the Latin, the Syro-Malabar and the Syro-Malankara, so that also works for varieties. The cultural varieties are not merely local, precisely because let us say the churches that come from the churches that come from abroad, they bring also their own culture influences and so on, though they are eventually adapted. You can see, for instance, how the Spanish and American influence in the Philippines, or the Dutch impact in Indonesia, or if you take India, the kind of missionaries who came. If you just take the Jesuits, we have had the French, the Spanish, the German, the American, the Australian, the Canadian, and the Belgian, and so on. So each territory will have a different way of looking at their faith, depending upon the missionaries. If you go to a church, you will know which missionary has been here, the kind of saints images that you have there, and so on and so forth. So you have this variety in a large country, etc. Then of course it also affects, if you like, the formation of leaders, because precisely, let us say, they are formed in different, if you walk into any faculty of, say, philosophy or theology, etc., very often the professors may not talk with one voice, because one professor has had his higher formation in Rome, another in Innsbruck, a third one in Frankfurt, a fourth one in Paris, and in Fordham or in Oxford, and so on. So they all come back with different cultural impression, and that passes through what they teach and the kind of formation they give to the young people. So all that leads also to big cultural difference, apart from the fact that all of us are trying to do today, at least local theology. Talk of Indian theology, Chinese theology, Indonesian theology, and so on. That effort is there. And then, in spite of, let's say, the Roman Church may be much more controlled, etc., but at the level of the other churches, we have, for instance, the Church of South India here in the south of India, the Church of North India in the north, and you have an kind of an autonomous, independent church in China being built up. And so these really represent precisely, in a sense, they are cutting out themselves away from their roots a bit and focusing much more on their presence here. Not to speak of other smaller groups called the independent churches. Another important element of this cross-cultural thing is, as one of the Asian theologians, Aloysius Piris, distinguishes between what he calls the cosmic religions and the metacosmic religions. And he says the metacosmic religions finally root themselves in the cosmic religions. And therefore, Christianity present relating to the local cosmic religion will differ according to the cosmic religions in each country, even within one country, in each region, and so on. This also is an element for differentiation and variety, etc. Today this variety is taking other forms like local theologies, local theologies and spiritualities. Say, when we speak about, let us say, an Indian theology or a Chinese theology, there is no one Asian theology. There are as many Asian theologies as there are Asian churches, etc. And this eventually, let's say, if in India, for instance, we have the ashram traditions. We do claim that there's an Asian way of thinking, a Asian way of looking at reality that is not necessarily an imitation of any other country, which is much more holistic and symbolic. And therefore it's not affected by the dichotomous rationalism of the West, even before the postmodern critique of metaphysics and so on and so forth, that we had an independent Asian tradition, which is much more also the whole Advaitic kind of an approach, both of India as well as to a certain extent also of Buddhism, a certain negative approach, not this, not that, the apophatic theology, that also is very present here. So in that way we do have a large variety also in Asian theologies, the way we think about, we react to the faith in our cultures today. And in this sense, let us say, even before, just now, let us say the Europe of the Enlightenment is getting out of the meta-narrative of the Greek rational culture, etc., etc. In a sense, I don't think the Greek rational culture never really imposed itself on the Asians in practice, though officially, because the people somehow or other, they were not really feeling at home. So much so that the whole question of pluralism, of cultures and religions is not seen as a threat by Asian churches. People in the West are quite upset about it. They want uniformity, uniformity, etc., etc. But we're quite happy to be pluralistic, to be different from each other, and we enjoy this communion in a certain sense, etc. And to this, let us say, we have also seen a lot of growth in the Asian theologies. Let's say, especially in the area of the dialogue of the gospel with the poor, with the oppressed, etc. We can speak of today Minjung theology in Korea, Dalit theology in India. You speak of the theology of struggle in the Philippines, and I'm sure each country will have, say, the Burokumin in Japan, for instance. They have got their own theological perspectives. We have the feminist theologies from all over Asia, from different places, especially with a special Asian flavor, because we have this image of the yin and the yang, the feminine image of the Avalokiteshvara in China, or the goddess, as more important than the god, in the Indian tradition. Or you also have this image of what you call this Ardhanarishvara, where you can have an image which is half female and half male, in some of the Indian Hindu temples and so on. So even the feminist theology has a lot of variety as you go across the different Asian countries and so on, and therefore the theological development also has contributed to the cultural variations, or the cultural variations have contributed to the theological differences in Asia. So in this way, I do think that the different Asian cultures have contributed to the emergence of different Asian. That's all. The different Asian cultures have contributed to the different Asian churches in Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Before I read what I have prepared here, I take a couple of moments to thank Professor Wilfred for the invitation he has extended to me to participate in this company of distinguished scholars. I also congratulate Professor Wilfred as the editor, and those of you who have contributed to this volume. We as scholars who are younger appreciate it, and we will use this as a springboard for many more conversation and enlightenment direction in our own exploration. Thank you and congratulations. I will now read what I have prepared, and I have prepared it keeping in mind the time, so I hope to complete it in good time. The continent of Asia encompasses diverse and multiple contexts, marked by plurality of peoples, cultures, socio-economic conditions, languages, religions, etc., etc. Plurality and diversity are terms that best describe Asia. Today's Asia is also a context of contradictions, with oppositional forces and circumstances existing together, such as abject poverty and enormous wealth, tolerant pluralist traditions and contesting parts. Ancient civilizations and ultra-modern communities reside side by side. These conditions of plurality and contradictions have undoubtedly left their imprints on Christianity in Asia. If the continent is not homogeneous, so also Christianity in Asia is not monolithic in its form and expression in the region. Christianity is observed in a plurality of contexts, diverse expressions, and in multiple forms of indigenous Christianity. Or so it seems. Beneath the plurality, the multiplicity, the heterogeneity and diversity of expressions of Christianity in Asia, there are certain commonalities shared across Asian communities that pose an interrogation on Christianity and its project of transformation. Listening to the irritation of liberation theologians of the regions and casting our clans to the canvas of the indigenous theologians, the misery of the margins, the ambiguity of Asian women's position / participation, and the shadows of the ancestors cannot be missed. The WCC, Council for World Mission and Evangelism, has produced a new mission document and approved during the last WCC Assembly at Busan, Republic of Korea, titled Together Towards Life. And incidentally, TTL was produced under the leadership of Asians and a woman who has lived and worked in Asia, Joseph Kyum, G. Varkis Morkorillos, and Kirsten Kim. Among the many missiological values, TTL underlines the persistent existence of the margins of society and recommends directions to reorient Christian mission as one that is with and from the margins. In other words, a Christianity that empowers the margins as well as expresses its mission with the experience of the margins. The TTL defines margins as those who are excluded from the center, where power, influence, and possibilities reside. Margins are those far removed from the position that has access to a system of affirmation and dignity. Margins are those whose dignity and human rights are negated when the dominant defines the rights and limits of privilege. Life of the margins are characterized by struggle, hunger, suppressed voice, exploited bodies, humiliation, human rights denied, and without freedom to own agency of self. Asia as a region of plurality, marked by multiple contexts, is also a region where a common trend of unprecedented economic growth is taking place across different Asian countries. In fact, economic forecasters predict some Asian countries overtaking global economic trends. Globalization that is both cultural and economic has brought unprecedented wealth and technological progress. However, a common reality that cannot be ignored are the victims of a system that is built on greed and accumulation. Measured by its growth in myriad indigenous forms and mission activities of Asian Christianities, Christianity is soon becoming an Asian religion. And the shibboleth of Christianity in Asia should be its role in fostering values that will dismantle rigid structures of inequalities that create margins. Another common feature shared by the plurality of Christianity in Asia is the ambiguous participation of women in both society and the church. Christianity has been a force of empowerment and freedom from oppressive cultural practices for women in many contexts in Asia, and rightly so, as evidence in the participation of women in different aspects of the modern society. The irony remains, however, that the religious movement that engendered equality for women in society still has ambiguous attitude towards women's complete and equal participation in the church. Largely, women continue to be those filling the pews, active in the peripheral functions of the church, and resource generators, but this merely underrepresented in the decision-making processes within patriarchal church leadership. The conversation, advocacy, and theological articulation for women's rights and equal participation will continue to challenge Christianity in Asia. Across the broad spectrum of plurality of Christianity in Asia, the ambiguous participation of women is a commonality that counters the transformation discourse of Christianity in Asia. Rigid patriarchy and androcentric attitude remain unchallenged and unchanged. The subsequent transformation of indigenous/tribal communities as a result of the encounter with Christianity is another significant attribute of the plurality of Christianity in Asia. Christianity indeed has ushered in a force of change and initiated modernization among many tribals and indigenous communities. reducing oral-based tradition into written codes, the introduction of modern education and livelihoods were crucial to the tremendous socio-economic transformation of the tribals and the indigenous societies. The dominant discourse of this experience is often described in binary terms, such as uncivilized to civilized, illiterate to literate, oral to written culture, heathen to Christianity. Undoubtedly, Christianity engendered a process of transformation. However, the persistent socio-political conditions, cultural practices, and rigid hierarchical structures that are exclusive and parochial beg the question: how is transformation measured in these communities? There is apparently a paradox in the discourse of Christianity and transformation. On one hand, defining cultural elements are highlighted for affirming a localized Christianity, while on the other hand, these same cultural elements could be exclusive and contributing to maintaining the status quo of pre-Christian socio-cultural structures in the tribals, indigenous communities. The plurality of Christianity in Asia, spread across a wide variety of specific contexts, shares these above-mentioned similar attributes: the margins produced by a brutal system of inequality, the ambiguous participation of women, and the dominant cultural practices that define the tribals and indigenous communities. Plurality of Christianity in Asia has significance when transformation is not limited and when transformation reaches the most vulnerable members in the communities. Christianity will be truly Asia in all its plurality of contexts. Christianity, to be truly Asian in all its plurality of contexts, will need to dialogue and cooperate with Asian resources and realities in working out a global ethic that is radically egalitarian. Thank you.
Before my short presentation, I would like to thank, of course, Felix Wilfred and Father Amal also. I really want invite Felix Wilfred and Father Amaldos many times to Seoul and other places. So maybe you are the one, you will be the one. Because I'm, many times I identify myself not as a scholar, but activist, sometimes contemplative activist or organic intellectual. So I would like to want to know more about all of you, so that I invite, because I conduct some international conference, theological conference, or interdisciplinary conference every year. So I would like to know all of you. Yeah, that's a short hidden agenda for here. I prepared my presentation, but when I heard the Father Amal's presentation, I would like to make it 2 points. The first, he mentioned about the Christianity in Latin America and also in Asia, in terms of the plurality of cultures and religions. What is difference between the two? I involved in the some international organization called Pax Humanae Economica. It's born 100 years ago, I think. I'm also product of those Pax Humanae Economica. I understand among you are not Catholic, so I'm not going to deeper about the introduction of the organization. But anyway, it's an umbrella organization of Catholic intellectuals and activists. among members there are some those from the Latin America, and according to them, their popular religions and also Christianity is go well with go together in a very harmonious way. So for them, is Christianity like it's just life, their life. I don't know exactly what that means, but I think the Christianity in Latin America is their life, every single moment. But that means the Christianity is not Christianity. It's just like just a way of life in one way or another. But here in Asia, it's quite different. Yesterday, many, the Cardinal Gracias and other bishops pointed out Christianity, Protestant and Catholic together, maybe, and not more than 3% of the whole populations. I'm not just talking about number, but I want to talk about its how Christianity embraces the life of the people. I think that is the key question and keywords. So that's why the bishops, Catholic bishops of conference, before organize a foundation of a bishops conference of Asia, FABC, in 1974. They first met in Manila in 1970. At the time already, they formulate the triple dialogue or threefold dialogue with the cultures, diverse cultures and religions and the poor, which is wonderful. And in terms of ecclesiology, I think it's much ahead of even liberation theology. They said in Puebla, option for the poor, Medellin, and Puebla, preferential for the option for the poor. But in FABC, ecclesiology, is much ahead. The church of the poor, that means there is no the subject, the dualistic division between the subject and object. Subject as a church and object as the poor. There is no between the church of the poor, which is very progressive, much more progressive than that of the Latin America. But then why the Christianity, especially Catholics, that remain just as a small? Yeah, the small is not, I don't mean it is small is not important. I don't mean it. But that, as Father Amal mentions, they bring their culture. The foreign missionaries brought their cultures, their religions, by destroying some popular religions. That does not make the people's the religiosity localized. That's kind of one of the hindrance to Christianity deeply rooted the real life of the Asian peoples. In the case of Korea, the same. We have very unique history. I don't know, moderate, please stop me when the 10 minutes is over.
Yes, the gentleman there will do that.
How many minutes is left?
6 more minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just briefly a little bit explain the Korean church history, Catholic history. Lay people was the one who really they create, not the foreign missionary. When it comes to this Korean Catholic Church, not Japanese, not Chinese. But it's different from, it's not the case of the Protestant church. Protestant church in Korea from the United States, the southern part of the very conservative one. So it's a different, it's safe to say that the Korean, maybe 80% of Korean Protestant church are kind of fundamental. So that the one of our panel ladies mentioned the WCC. So many the Korean Protestant believers object even WCC's the General Assembly in Busan in Korea. So anyway, in Korea, the foreign missionary also brought their cultures and their religion, Christianity. But I don't know. It's why is Christianity Christianity in Korea is quite different from Japanese and Chinese. China, in Japan, Christianity is a very minority, but not the case in Korea. Korea is maybe more than 20% of whole population is Korea. But still, we had the Korean had Buddhism 1,500. The history of Buddhism, the 500 Confucianism and Taoism also, and also the shamanism. If you take as the religion, whether it's a meta-cosmic religion or cosmic religion as it is, that's a religiosity of Korean people. But the Christian reader at the time ignored that, reject that. So I think that is the problem. That there is no the respect of people's life. The same is true is the whole. I think it's whole Asia. So my major is an interfaith dialogue, interreligious dialogue between the other faiths in Christianity. But one of most important thing is it's not interfaith dialogue itself. But before that, if we make not the level of the scholar like you, the level of the clergy, that's many times the interreligious dialogue end up with a party of words. How can make our dialogue deep down level of the real life of a people? I think that is important. All the way from many people struggle with that, but not successful so far. Why? Because many churches, most churches in Asia suffer clericalism. Clergy monopolize everything. They corrupt from the beginning, still maintain corruption. And the second, that they have fear to lose their rights, their some money or facilities, everything. So we need, before we are talking about interfaith dialogue, we need intra-dialogue, intra-religious dialogue. Dialogue between lay peoples and church leaders, clergy. 2 weeks ago, October 28th, in Vatican, there is some gathering between popular movements of Christianity, I think it's Catholic, and with the Pope Francis. Is the Morales? I think he's his Morales is a president of where? Venezuela?
No.
Bolivia, yes. Yeah, Bolivia. Morales is present there, not as a president, but as a leader of the movement. And he support very much NGO. So what I'm saying is, he definitely declare that NGO is not, church is not NGO, yeah, which I agree. But NGO is kind of the role to make the church to go beyond and to reach out real people. So, but formation of lay people is zero. So all the time the church support either religious or the priest. So we need make some the shift, which should be made in that sense. Otherwise, we have difficulties. I want say something about Minjung theology. Can I have 2 minutes? 1 minute? Okay, thank you. When it comes to Minjung theology, one have a very strong methodology and very strong one. There is no between the there's many different kind of Minjung theology, but we all the time divide to gospel and culture, gospel versus culture, and the seed versus soil, and text and context. But in early the Minjung theologian in Korea, it just gospel is as a story, and our life is real as a story. Story meet story. So we are not only a subject. We need to learn from the real life. Like, for example, we had the Seoul. The Korea. Held a G20 summit maybe years back. At that time, I invited numerous theologians and economists, but they don't know how could theologize from the G20s, which is very important now under the new liberalism. So what can we learn from a G20 phenomenon like a G20 neoliberalism, or the more widening between the richer and the poor? So we need to learn this kind of interdisciplinary practice. Otherwise, the theology is just empty hand. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua. It is my great privilege to be back in India. I used to be a faculty member at Union Biblical Seminary for 4.5 years, but I haven't been back to India for the last 8 years. So when I received the invitation from Professor Felix, I just immediately accepted it, and it was a great opportunity, and to see my old friends again. And thank you very much for your invitation. My topic is to do with the inter-Asian and global missionary movements. Along that line, I would like to address to the question of distinctiveness of the Asian theologies or churches. We are indeed living in the very exciting period. When you look at the Edinburgh 1910, the composition of the participants, about 1,200 people, mainly Western male participants, mainly Europeans and Americans. But in the centenary meeting in the 2010 in Edinburgh, there were lots of colors, literally colors, in the participants. Although numbers are a lot less, but you could see the representative from various different parts of the world. And indeed, Asian churches are making a great impact on the world Christianity, both numerically and also theologically. So Andrew Wirtz, a famous mission historian, often called the center of gravity, the shift of the center of gravity. I'll come back to that phrase. I have some difficulties of that phrase, but nevertheless, people are talking about center of gravity when it comes to the numerical growth. So it is exciting to see, and when you look at the Atlas of Global Christianity, published by the Edinburgh University Press, it's exciting to see numerical changes and different dynamics taking place in world Christianity. But I just want to come back to the idea of center of gravity, because when you read the volume produced by K.S. Lathrop, you may know the great mission historian, the history of expansion of Christianity, the volume 6, he mentions about how he have a perspective when he wrote this great volume of the history of expansion of Christianity. He said first he looked at the kind of geographical expansion of the churches. That's not very difficult to assess. You can see the data and so on and so forth. Second, he looked at the distinctive characteristics of the churches, that you can say maybe theology or type of worship and various distinctive ideas or the interaction with the churches and so on. But third point, he mentioned that he wanted to look at the perspective of the contribution of the churches in the humanities. Now, when it comes to the third point, if I may say that he didn't really discuss that in his book. But I think that's very, very vital for our understanding of our churches when you look at the Christian churches in Asia and elsewhere. And also when you talk about mission, how do we understand about our mission and identity? Because unless we churches making a contribution to the wider society, then I think we are missing a great point there. So I think we would like to look at that aspects, and I would like to expand some of the discussions in our sessions here. So if you look at the 3 points about the K.S. Lathrop, if I may use that model, first area of church growth or church dynamics or demographic changes taking place in Asia, that's very exciting to see in various parts of the world. And many people, a number of people mentioned the Korean churches. Yes, of course, Korean churches have grown greatly in terms of numerical growth. But when it comes to the mission practice and also church practice, we do have a serious problem in Korean churches. I can say that very confidently. When it comes to the issue of the Asianness of the Asian churches, I would say that the Asian churches are grown out of the struggle of the being a minority or being a poor and being a kind of marginalized section of the society, and that struggle is constantly present. Perhaps in Korea now the situation has changed, but that aspect is still there in Asian context. And of course, in Asian churches, we do have a struggle with the different cultures and different religious traditions. That's the richness of the Asian culture and traditions, but at the same time, that's a great challenge. How do you present the gospel in that context? And how do you interact with the different traditions and religions without being hostile or without being marginalized, that you don't have anything to contribute? And I think that's a very important aspect. That's why I always want to emphasize the churches in India and other parts of the world, because India, without out of that struggle, come out with a very creative theological understanding of how to become Christians in the different context. But also, I would like to point out when it comes to the interaction with the different churches, you do have a missionary movements between Asian countries. But again, we need to look at the difference between the kinds of zeal of the missionary activities, but at the same time, how do you also deal with the fundamentalism? It's very difficult to distinguish. Often we talk about Korean missionaries. They have a great zeal and dedication and committed, and that we need to respect that. But at the same time, Korean missionaries often show the fundamentalist attitude toward other religions, other people, other culture, insensitivities. So you do have to balance these two, and it is a struggle, and I would say that's the creative balance. We can't just ignore one or the other, and we do need to address to that. But I would say churches in Asia is struggling, but at the same time, it is exciting to see the kind of interactions between the Christianities within the Asian boundaries. Okay. Now, second aspect of this theology, again, I must mention the Asian theology. When it comes to the Asian theology, Indian theology is very creative, and I must say that we must look at the Indian theologies in order to understand Asian theologies. Of course, we do have the Minjung theology and other theologies, but Indian theological struggle and Indian theological the input has been very creative, both in terms of enculturation approach and also the liberation approaches. And I think I would say that's the contribution of the Asian theologies to the world Christianity, that this struggle between these two dimensions often is not very cooperative, because people are emphasizing the liberation aspect of Christian gospel, often accuse the enculturation approach as a bit kind of sense compromise and so on, and vice versa. People who are advocating enculturation often also criticize the liberation approaches. But I think these two, again, are the very complementary, and we need to struggle with that, how to interact with these two types of theologies and come out with a distinctively Asian contribution to the world Christianity. Then lastly, I would like to look at this area of public contribution of Christian theology and Christian churches. Well, this is not a new concept, of course. We Christian churches always wanted to contribute to the wider society. But when it comes to theology, I think we have some limited scope, partly because theology in the West has developed in the Western context, which is the traditionally majority of the audience were Christians, and also very much interacting with the Western philosophies. So unless you understand the Western philosophies, you don't fully appreciate Western theologies. Whereas Asian theologies are interacting with the different religious traditions and cultures, and also different socio-political aspects. So Asian theologies are very much interacting with the sociologies, anthropology, and political sciences. And I think that's the strength of the Asian theologies, coming with that kind of context and also interacting with a variety of subject areas. So we can come up with various creative ideas and religious studies as well. So I think that's the area that I would like to emphasize that. I am personally working on the public theology. Now, many people understand the public theology very differently, but I think the public theology can provide a certain complementary approach to the liberation theology and enculturation theology. I'm not saying that public theology would replace these theologies, no, public theology can complement to these various types of theology, particularly when it comes to the Indian context and various other Asian contexts. And I think the Christian theology should speak directly to the wider audience rather than address to the Christian audience only. Of course, it is very difficult in terms of methodological development and also conceptual adaptation. It is very difficult, but I think that's Christian theology. We need to work on that in order to communicate to the wider society. Basically, public theology is a public contribution of the theology to the wider society. How do we do that? There are various different approaches to the theologies, but I think yesterday we have seen the good example of the public contribution of the theology. You may say that display, but that's a very important aspect of the public engagement of the Christian church and theology. How do you do that? Yes, in terms of writings, in terms of intellectual articulations, but also at the same time, we do engage in the areas of the campaign or advocacy and the policy making and so on and so forth. And I think church need to get engaged into that. Again, when it comes to the public engagement of the Christian church, I can give various examples of my own Korean churches. Often Korean church, many people talk about large churches, mega churches, and so on. In Korea, in order to be qualified to be called mega churches, you need to have at least 20,000 members attendance. So otherwise you are not qualified to called as a mega churches. There are about 20 mega churches in Seoul alone. You may have visited there. It's wonderful, great. But at the same time, it is sad to see these mega churches is mainly the budgets and the programs are operating within the churches. Of course, they do contribute some fund to the outside of the churches and so on, mission work and so on. But mainly the fundings are used for the operation of the churches. Very middle class, and people are happy in the churches. People have their own identity in being a church. Is that the model of the church we are talking about? Yes, that can be one aspect, but that shouldn't be a model of the Asian churches. There are so many struggling churches in Asia, even in Korea also. So I think we need to reshape our thinking rather than thinking of the numerical growth, wonderful, great, but at the same time we need to see our own identity and our own mission. So when it comes to you need to conclude, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Inter-Asia and global missionary movements, I would like to look at this aspect, particularly the last part, the public contribution of the Christian church.
I'd like to thank you so much, the moderator, for directing the discussion rightly in the right direction. One of the good points that has come about in the sharing of panelists, I think, is the challenge of, bridging the embeddedness on the one hand and getting into a certain kind of enclosure the other hand. I think that's one of the important difficulties that all challenges Christianity in Asia has to face in the days to come. As Professor Michael Amandas rightly said, Christianity is a gospel for the margins, so it is embedded there. But then in today's context of, say, cultural politics, this embeddedness also becomes a kind of an enclosure, which is actually a real challenge. So in the Indian context, we now get into an era of casteism, caste-dominated kind of a churchiness. So how do we actually get out of this, or move out of this? This dialectics, this binary, embeddedness, which is very much necessary, a rootedness, which is necessary, But rootedness should not become an enclosure, should not become a frozen kind of a standpoint. But how to kind of get out of this is, I think, Professor Sebastian Kim has pointed out some, avenue when he speaks about the public. Public becomes a kind of a prophetic voice for us to move beyond this kind of a directives. Perhaps the cultural flow has to continue, I think, from the west to the east. We may not be kind of, shy of having a cultural flow from that side also. So that will be a kind of enriching voice for the Asian Christianity in the days to come. That's what
I'm Dr. Victor Ferron from Goa. I like to think along with the embeddedness, but something that is really embedded and forgotten too, and may remain unthought. The embeddedness is very much connected with the very origins of our Christianity under colonization. And Christianization and colonization came together, at least in my experience in Goa and any other places too in Asia. As a result, there is a lot of trauma of colonization and afterlife of colonization which we are dealing with right now. And therefore, being Asian also means being wounded with the past. And as a result, that wounded past can affect what someone was saying, why we are not totally living our Christianity to the fullest, to the optimum level. Perhaps we need to deal with this. Our theology has forgotten its history. We have dealt with culture, we have dealt with maybe human rights and other issues, but our own origins are lost somewhere. And as a result, there's a cloud over the face of Christ, and he is seen as the God of the conquerors. So it's important that we need to revisit this area.
I'm Dr. John Robles from Morningstar College, Calcutta. I would like to take, in terms of intra-Asian dialogue and intra-critique, particularly the whole issue of clericalism, I would touch upon, because I'm asking the question, is it because Christianity is responded to as a religious movement by the minorities for their own self-affirmation, together with financial position and economic status, and therefore clerical phenomenon comes along with that. Because particularly what Dr. Paul was telling, that Christianity, the bedrock of Christian movement over there is laity. Even in that country, laity, but when it comes at the organizational level, the clerical issue is very powerful. So I would see how, in terms of intra-church relationship and critique of Asian churches, how we can respond to this. That would be my sort of question I would raise further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Two things, just bullet form. First is, nobody has alluded to the whole process of movement, geographical as well as cultural. I call it migration. So this migration of values, cross-cultural breeding, has really enhanced the spirituality of East and the West, the inter-cultural, inter-religious process of building up. When sometimes, when we talk, it can negate the whole idea of the kind of gains that we have made in the process. Secondly, just as we are negating to some extent in the conversation that we had, the narratives of the dialogue, we were concerned about the flow from the west to the east. Why can't we, as we are talking about interreligious, be proud of the flow from the east to the west? So I do not have to elaborate this to this august audience. So lot of flow is from the east to the west, where we are not accounting in our dialogues. But I think it is to be seen as we ponder on this issue these days.